Chapter 28. Silva Techniques in Social Work. By Jonelle Monaco Lytle. I had been thinking on and off for quite a while that I wanted to work with the homeless. The Silva system had given me so much over the years, so many blessings, that I wanted to give something back. It would be my way of tithing. In the 26 years that I have taught the Silva techniques, I have given numerous scholarships to children whose families could not afford the tuition. I have given equally as many to adults who were poor. I now wanted to share it with the truly poor, the homeless. This was in November 1995. A plan is born. My plan was to work with people in Virginia Beach, where I live. One cold, windy, and rainy November day I was visiting a friend's church. I was feeling sorry for myself because of some recent financial difficulty and I was worrying about making my mortgage payment. I was looking for sympathy when I shared this feeling with Linda, a woman I met at my friend's church. She commented, "I wish I had a house and a house payment to worry about. My husband, son, and I are living in the woods a few blocks from here." She was not fishing for sympathy, it was just a statement. That night when I went to bed it was 35 degrees, raining, and there were winds of 25 to 30 miles per hour. The temperature was supposed to dip into the 20s, and that, of course, meant snow. It was about 60 degrees in my bedroom. The howling wind was so noisy I had trouble getting to sleep. A commitment is made. But it wasn't just the noise that kept me awake, a simple Silva technique could have handled that. It was my thoughts of Linda and her family. Even her dog, Buddy, was living in the woods with them. Within an hour or so I had made a full-blown commitment to God that I would use Silva to help the homeless. Guided by coincidence through a series of coincidences, I ended up in a Silva System Sales lecture series in Baltimore, Maryland, about 5 hours from my home. When I arrived, Victor Covens, a dedicated Silva supporter and sponsor of the Silva Cruises, introduced me to the class and mentioned that I was a Silva instructor. During a break, Trucks and Sykes, someone I had never met, made a beeline for me. He had his hand extended to shake mine. His handshake didn't seem to be one of introduction, it was more like a handshake between people who had just made a deal of some kind. His first words were, "I've been thinking of doing some research on how fast the Silva method could mainstream the homeless back into society." As he spoke I noticed that he was wearing a big red button that said, "Homeless, not hopeless." We connected mentally. We were each fulfilling each other's plan well, we thought the plan was ours, but we both knew and discussed later how it was actually God's plan. Trucks and Sykes is the president of the Baltimore Homeless Union. We spent several hours that night after class talking with each other. Bigger than expected. When he told me that Baltimore had the largest homeless population in the United States, I knew that I had to begin there, especially now that I had someone to organize the class for me. When he told me there were 32,000 homeless in Baltimore, I corrected him, as I thought he meant to say 3,200. In fact, even 32 sounded like a lot. So, when he corrected me and explained that it was 32,000, I knew then why God had guided me to Baltimore. I figured if I could train just 1%, which would be 320 people, that might be the critical mass. I believed that it would also affect the homeless throughout the planet. I guess I'm a born optimist. We made plans for me to return to Baltimore the next month to give an introductory lecture to as many homeless as Truckson could gather in the hope of getting them to sign up for a class where I'd teach some Silva techniques. Praying for guidance. On my return trip to Virginia Beach, I had a lot of time to think about what I had just committed myself to. There was a part of me that thought I had bitten off more than I could chew. Then I realized it had nothing to do with me. Silva could help anyone and everyone. The system was successful worldwide. The first night back at the beach I did some heavy-duty praying. I begged God to give me the trigger words I would need to inspire each and every person who showed up at the introduction, to have the desire to be in the class. Do it mentally first. I started really getting excited. In the time leading up to the lecture, I found myself talking to these homeless people, who I hadn't even met yet, all day long in my mind. There was so much to share with them. I could only picture success and happiness for them. After a few days, I could even picture their faces. I couldn't wait to meet them. How many would attend? 50 homeless people came to the lecture. Trucks and passed around sign-up sheets, and 49 of the 50 signed up for the class that we'd hold in January. About 15 minutes after starting time on the first day in January, one homeless person wandered in. He came to inform me that he didn't think anyone would show up because one of them had frozen to death that morning when the electricity went off in a federal building. Getting recommitted. I excused myself, went to the ladies' room, cried, and then prayed. I told God that I was perfectly willing to work with just one student if that was His will. Within 15 minutes 2 more people joined the class. Then a few more came, and by 11:30 we had 23 in the class. Over the next 5 days, we always had between 11 and 23 people in the class. I was thrilled to see that the Silva books that Victor Covens so generously donated were always with them. My message to the class. As I prepared for the class in the weeks leading up to it, I was inspired over and over by the following words, so I used them as my introduction to the class. I just want you to know, before we begin, what a privilege it is for me to be your Silva trainer. Somehow in my heart I know that you are very wise souls to have chosen this most difficult path that you have been on. When you use these Silva techniques you are about to learn this week, you will be an inspiration to your fellow homeless and to the rest of the world. I admire you for who you are and what you have been through, and that at some level you have chosen to suffer through your survival. Thanks to a great man named Jose Silva and his years of research and sharing, you won't have to suffer anymore. I hope you know I speak this truth from the bottom of my heart and the very essence of who I am. And who I am is one of God's servants serving His children in the best manner I know, the Silva system. I thank God daily for that. May I be the first to congratulate you on the beginning of the best of the rest of your life. Let's begin. So many who needed my help on Tuesday, one of the students brought in a magazine with an article about homelessness. I turned to the page with the article and there was a photograph of a dignified-looking man wearing a suit. He looked successful and sophisticated. He held a sign in his lap that read, "I am not a bum. I am not lazy. I am 74 years old. I have worked all of my life. I would like to work for food. I do not want a handout." My eyes filled with tears, and I used the 3 fingers technique to regain control of my emotions. It was so sad that this man felt that he had to defend who he was and what he was doing. I knew at that moment that I would dedicate a portion of the rest of my life to using Silva to help the homeless. At that moment I reminded the class of something I had told them earlier. I said to you at the beginning of this class that I had a sneaky and almost guilty suspicion that I would get more out of this week than you will, and that I will learn more from you than you will learn from me. Slow going. By Tuesday afternoon they only had the intro and a few of the very first techniques. It is important for me to emphasize how little of the Silva training they had so you can fully understand the miracle that occurred on Wednesday morning. When I got into my van to drive to the class Wednesday morning, I noticed that one of the windows was broken. Almost all of my Silva materials were gone, including a large suitcase with books written and signed by Jose Silva. A bold experiment. When I arrived at class I immediately put 2 6-foot tables together. The 17 students and I sat around the tables. I put the rock in the center of the table and told them to write down anything that came to their minds, because anything could be a clue as to where the Silva materials were. Much information detected by 11:45. A number of us were able to describe what the person who broke into the van was wearing, right down to the shoes. Several people came up with the name of a street, the same street. Several came up with a different street, and one person had written down the intersection of those 2 streets. 3 more homeless walked in just as we were finishing up the exercise. When we related the story, they immediately set off on foot, before I could stop them. I was so moved I almost cried. A few minutes later 2 more came in. They were familiar with the neighborhood we were talking about and went to check it out. As they were leaving I had a vision of the 2 of them returning with my big suitcase. At 2:30 that afternoon we were taking our lunch break. Victor Covens had generously supplied lunch for us all week. While I had my eyes closed and was energizing my punch, I heard one of the ladies at the other end of the room, near the long corridor which led to the exit, scream, "Oh, my God, look at you." Results produced. When I opened my eyes, to my surprise there were 2 of the men who had gone searching. Coming down the hall toward the room with my Silva suitcase, the books were missing, and a lot of what I did get back was damaged. They found some materials in the street and some in trash cans and dumpsters. We celebrated, and not just the return of my materials. The thing we celebrated the most was how they had used their faculties of genius so effectively, with so little Silva training behind them. They were all so proud. Warren's first success. By the Thursday afternoon break, a man I will call Warren came up to me with a big smile and said, "I can't wait to tell you this. I can't wait any longer. I want you to know that last night, for the first time in 2 years, I slept in a real bed, not on cement, but a real bed. The reason I can't wait any longer to tell you is because I won't be here tomorrow." He saw the happiness in my face when he told me about the bed, but he also saw my disappointment when he said he wouldn't complete the course. He grinned and said, "The reason I won't be here tomorrow is because I have to start my new job." Warren's story. At this point I did something I hadn't done up to now, mainly because I thought it was none of my business. I asked, "Warren, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but I am curious. Why have you been on the street?" He told me that he, his wife, and their 14-year-old daughter had been living in California in a $200,000 home. They had a truck, 2 cars, and a boat. Between Warren and his wife, they were making about $80,000 a year. 3 summers before, when they returned to Baltimore for a vacation, Warren's 19-year-old son, from a previous marriage, was shot and killed. He felt guilty for his son's death and experienced pain that could only be numbed by prescription painkillers. This worked for a time. When the prescription drugs no longer worked, he turned to illegal ones. In just 10 months he lost everything. His wife and daughter left, and he never returned to California. He told me that when I gave the introductory lecture, there was something I said that made him think there was this little ray of hope that I don't have to live on the street forever. He came to the class out of curiosity. Remember my prayer for trigger words? Another success for Warren. In a class several months later, Warren joined us for an afternoon. He shared what he had achieved with the help of the Silva techniques. He had used the 3 fingers technique, mirror of the mind, habit control, and sleep control. He signed himself into a rehab clinic and he had totally recovered from the crack cocaine habit. He planned to rejoin his family later that summer. Many happy endings. Trucks and Sykes told me that 70% of the homeless that we trained found jobs and homes. Warren's story and others inspired people to believe that Silva techniques could help them overcome their problems. Every day I thank God for the many blessings the Silva method has brought me. Jonelle Monaco Lytle is willing to go anywhere in the world to help any Silva instructor or graduate with their first Silva homeless class. She will do it free of charge as long as you provide her airfare and lodging.